Thank you. Our next speaker is Dina Moyal. Dina has an LLB degree from Tel Aviv University and a PhD in history from Stanford. She teaches courses on Soviet history and on the history of the Soviet legal system here in Tel Aviv University. Her research interests include Soviet post-Stalinist histories, relations between the political and legal spheres under totalitarian regimes, and I think probably your talk will also relate to civil cases and civil law, which is what Dina wrote about in her PhD.
Thank you, Anna. Should I stay here?
You want to stay there?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Anat. And thank you for this opportunity to speak here and for this occasion. And I hope this actually continues as cooperations between all the people who came here for this event. So, I would like to continue this discussion of over the way ideology influences law, but from a slightly different perspective. I would like to examine how actually, what is the relations between ideology and law? How do they influence each other? How can they function together in totalitarian regimes? I mean, this issue bothers both lawyers and historians of liberal systems as well, but when we speak about totalitarian regimes, this is even more so. So the present paper examines the challenges the Bolsheviks in Russia faced when trying to use law to advance their revolution. So from the early revolutionary period, when law was needed to enforce new norms in society, and even to late socialism under Brezhnev, when he said that the Soviet Union is in the transition from socialism to communism, so communists debated about the role of law in this transition period. And the paper will actually show that one of the main challenges of the Soviets was one of using law in a perpetual revolution. How do we use law in a situation when we want constantly change society? And how do we establish a system of law that will normalize and revolutionize actually in the same time? So I will touch upon the early Soviet period also, but I will focus more on the late Soviet period, which I studied, particularly because I think that in that period these the relations between law and revolution are most apparent. So as I see it, the contradiction between law and revolution, between stability and movement, lies at the basis of Soviet law. By its very nature, law is the source of normalization. It introduces rules, it fixates power relations, it regulates social order. In a legal system presupposes the establishment of a legitimate sovereign that enacted those laws and creates institutions and certain enforcement mechanisms to support that system. Now, even the most progressive laws actually expressed in their enactment certain fixed authority. And while a revolution, on the other hand, at least in its modern sense of the word, in the French revolutionary sense that the Bolsheviks adopted, goes against existing laws and changes them not through available legislative means, but by force, and declares a new system of values and norms. Moreover, what defines a revolution, in its modern sense of the word, is not only an attempt to a coup d'etat, but use of violent means against established authority, but as Harold Berman actually wrote in his book Online Revolution, new structures of social and economic relations, new structure of law, as well as new visions of the community, new perspectives on history, and new sets of values and beliefs. End of quote. So and this basic contradiction between law and revolution actually is further sharpened by Marxist ideology, which rejects any use of law as a suitable tool for revolutionary society. So according to Marx, as Any legal system mirrors class and power relations in society, while law, as an act of a legislator, is a tool used by the ruling classes, the bourgeoisie and the capitalist society, and it's used to control the working class. So actually, law stands in an opposition to the revolution. However, when the Bolsheviks tried to implement Marxism, they discovered quite early on the difficulty of establishing a new order without using law. So even in his State and Revolution in 1917, Lenin insisted that law could not be completely disposed of from the start, but was still needed in the transition period from capitalism to communism. So the terms revolutionary legality, a term coined in 1920, and later the term socialist legality, which were used throughout the Soviet period to describe the Soviet legal regime, meant to establish an equilibrium between law and revolution. So they represented an attempt to create a law that would revolutionize. But the use of the term actually, as I see it, concealed this initial paradox rather than solve it. So the new regime used law to instill new norms in society, but at the same time continued to deviate from the law when it stood in the way of building new socialist order. So, for example, the first order on law after the Bolshevik Revolution actually abolished old Tsarist courts and established new people's courts. But these courts were supposed to act according to revolutionary consciousness, as long as they did not contradict old Tsarist laws. And while revolutionary tribunals were supposed to investigate cases of counter-revolutionary crimes, the CHK, the All-Russian Emergency Commission, continued arresting people without legal basis. And so this contradiction in the early 1920s, a period when these issues were still debated in the Soviet Union, actually produced two interpretations of revolutionary legality. One interpretation actually claimed that the novelty of the new system was in the revolutionary content of the laws and not in a new form of legality. So general principles of law were still maintained, while new ideas, new principles were injected through the content of the laws. Another interpretation claimed that legality, the new socialist legality, was absolutely new, and it was so new that it couldn't be really defined until the revolution was over. This debate was quite quickly wrapped up under Stalin, a period that I won't elaborate on, but if you have questions, I'm happy to answer later. But in that period, the solution that was reached, many say actually went along the first interpretation, where we're going to have new laws. We have a new criminal law, new civil law, new law on courts, procuracy, etc. But the novelty of the law will be in its content, not in its implementation. Some say that Stalin they were talking about the retreat of the revolution under Stalin. It is ironic, however, that right after Stalin published the new Stalinist Constitution of 1936, terror within the party started, and one of the most great deviations from that law. But what happened under Stalin as the big leader is the revolutionary process actually concealed this contradiction. Huge changes in the Soviet Union managed to to create unity between legality and law, reduce general questions of legality to questions of law and implementation. And the discussion of the contradiction between law and revolution and possible clashes re-emerged actually under Khrushchev after the death of Stalin. So in 1956, almost 60 years ago, in his secret speech, Khrushchev actually declared that Stalin's cult of personality tempered the principles of legality and allowed terror in the party, cleansing in the Red Army, failure in leading World War II, and supremacy of the secret police with Berg at its head. And actually, restoration of socialist legality was key to the continuous building of socialism in Russia, the true Leninist way. So for him, the subtext was, in order to reach true, real socialism, we need to return to real socialist legality. So for him, stability, security, and the end of arbitrariness and terror were essential to the Soviet revolutionary project. Legality was critical if the new leadership wanted to gain legitimacy, to win popular support, to mobilize the masses for the revolutionary project. And the way Khrushchev did it was actually introducing his reforms, legal reforms, which I wish to kind of emphasize 6 points in his reforms, or his interpretation of socialist legality. So first was the demand that legality was not only demanded from the people, but from state institutions as well. So suddenly all newspapers are filled with articles criticizing this or that official, saying, oh, the state has to keep the law. The second was transferring responsibility for legality to the Soviet procuracy. While before it was kind of under the state, the Ministry of Justice, and also under the secret police. So a law on procuracy supervision of 1955 transferred authority of supervision to the Soviet procuracy. Under Khrushchev, great number of new laws were published. New law, new criminal code, civil code, and later on this process continued under Brezhnev with new health, labor, housing laws. These laws meant to, in this constant revolution, they were supposed to update the laws and bring them into the same line with the stage of the revolution. Another point was promotion of legal education for all legal personnel. So not only judges, not only procurators, but even lawyers were supposed to have proper higher legal education. Something that before that the stress was on political affiliation and affiliation with a party. And also, there was a limit on party intervention in specific cases. So party intervention was not done case by case. This is the way we usually think about the Soviet Union, with the party actually interfering and speaking to the judges and following every case, but in general directions. We could say I look at those as interpreting the laws. So while we normally interpret laws according to the way the legislator spoke about them, so there were party pamphlets or publications that spoke about new laws. And the last thing that actually emerged in the late 60s is the idea that socialist legality was not only something that belonged to legal officials, but also to the people. So suddenly we have classes of legal education. Lectures on law are compulsory, so judges and advocates have to give monthly lectures to workers and enterprises, to farmers, and people are supposed to know the law. all these measures were supposed to grant certain predictability and security to the people. But we have to remember that Khrushchev was not only seeking for legality, but for socialist legality. So legal education went hand in hand with political education, with courses of Marxism, Leninism, with courses on Communist Party history, and political education. All these were part of legal studies, and the idea behind it was, okay, if we teach people both history, law and politics, the system will produce desired decisions. The problem, however, and this will be the last kind of the result of this process, is that paradoxically, this attempt to bring law and socialism to work together actually with time failed, and the paradox between law and revolution constantly emerged as a problem. So, for example, in cases in the West, we think about the law as a process. So, due process of law, this is one of the central ideas, because we're interested in the system, in the way the system works, more than in the result, the produced result. When we have the revolution as the main idea in socialism, we're more interested in the result than in the process. And this produces different strange deviations from the law. For example, in the famous case of Rokotov, case of economic case of speculation, Khrushchev, the court sentenced the accused for the years to return the punishment according to the law, and Khrushchev intervened, actually having a new legislation, and these people were executed and condemned to death. So what happened actually in this process of introducing legality is three results that the leadership did not expect. One result was that legal education created a legal community. So legal officials are aware of the law. They are told by the state that they need to follow the law, and they speak a certain language that the state not all the time understands or accepts. So that's the first one. The second one is that Soviet people are aware of the law as well, and when they go to court, they can say, okay, that this is my right. And sometimes people wrote in their appeals, how can it be that 40 years after the revolution, the court cannot understand that this is what I'm supposed to get? And the third thing is that the Soviet state itself, when it declared that legality is one of its main principles, it was much harder for it to deviate from legality when these problems occurred. So even when it interfered, like in this Rokotov case or other political cases, it was done not only in order to punish the people or in order to set an example, but one of the main purposes was legitimizing the state, explaining what it does. And this process gradually, in my opinion, led to the detotalitariization of the system in the long run towards the late 70s and early 80s. Thank you.